Hello, and welcome to the very first episode of the Different Views, Common Grounds podcast. In this first episode, myself and my three other hosts will give you a background of what our political views are and how we see the world currently, as well as provide some context into our history into why the political views are the way they are. We're also going to debate what is more important for society, art or sports. Stay tuned, and we'll get started with the show.
News, politics, culture, current events. We all have different views, but we stand on common ground. We all have different views, but we stand on common ground.
Welcome to the Different Views, Common Ground podcast. This is our very first episode. I'm happily joined by three childhood friends who are well prepared with herbal remedies and alcoholic beverages to satiate their palates. Whatever your flavor is, I encourage everyone listening to do the same. Sit back and relax while we bitch and yell at each other about issues that we literally have no control over, but with the aim of hopefully finding some sort of common ground. I am your host. My name is Johnny Bones. No, that is not my real name. Yes, that is the pseudonym I use for basically any sports video game in which I create a character. I have broken many a home run records and set NFL franchise records through the virtual world as Johnny Bones. And with me, my other host on this call, we have Ralphie Nades, Walter Sobchak, and Arnold Sobchak. And last but not least, although maybe least in some people's eyes, Arnold Reagan.
What's going on?
So if you can't tell by some of those names, you might already know what our general political leanings are. But I wanted to get started by just talking about the inception of this podcast, kind of why we're doing it, and ultimately what the goal of each episode is going to be, which is to find a common ground. We all have different views, and we have different life experiences that have caused us to look at the world in our own unique ways and view what's best for our country specifically, but the world. And with all these different views, there has to be some sense of common ground. This does not mean we will agree with each other, but the goal of each of these episodes is really to find that common ground where we can all stand upon and be like, well, we see what other people envision for this country. We understand why they have these views. And ultimately, that, I would say, is the ultimate goal, is to understand why we have these different views, and what's particularly a very tense time in American politics and in the country in general. This actually started from a group chat that I believe you started, right, Walter?
Yeah, that's correct. So we had a bigger group chat going, big group of friends, maybe 12 or so. We found ourselves often getting into political spats in the chat, and there seemed like there was
or rage quitting and ruining
or
a whole
rage
entire
quitting.
thread.
Yeah, we can get to that too. The history of the chat could be a whole episode in itself. But we have this group chat that's just mainly just for just shooting the crap around. But we would get into these political spats back and forth, and we realized that half of our friends hated that and were not interested. So we created this whole separate chat dedicated to talking politics, and still very active. It's probably our more active group chat, I think, now at this point. And yeah, it's just kind of evolved into this bigger thing now. So kudos to you, Johnny, for taking this to the next level and thinking up this idea, because I think it's pretty cool.
Yeah, no, thank you. I mean, we wouldn't have it without the three of you guys on it as well. And yeah, I was probably the last person to actually join the Common Grounds original group chat. So I can't imagine all the banter that went on there before I joined. I know Arnold would talk to me about it on his trips out here in LA, trying to get me in. So I can't imagine what I missed, but I will say, being 3 hours behind you all, I hear the ping on my phone at 6:30 in the morning about every day, and it's usually the same characters uh, inciting that. So thank you for also being my alarm during this time and helping me wake up in the morning. I've definitely had to pause it quite a few times, though.
Someone's got to do it, right?
Someone has to. I mean, we got to keep it going. Well, anyway, that being said, I would like to kind of start off by just going through a state of affairs on what's going on in our country right now. Um, hopefully do this maybe once a month. We'll see, just to kind of keep people updated on what's going on. So there's some sense of why we might be talking about certain topics, and if we're bringing in, recent news stories, there'll be an understanding of where those are coming from. I boiled down this moment in history of American history into three big points. I would say the first one, and probably I would say the biggest event going on right now, is we are 6 months into the COVID-19 pandemic, where regardless of what party or level of government you agree with or think about, the U.S. has unquestionably dropped the ball in their response to fighting this pandemic. The second point about what's going on right now is it's an election year. It's 2020, but it's not only. I would say it's not your average election year. I would argue that this feels like the most divisive time period of my life um, within this country, and I would personally say that this moment and this election is probably more important to the path America takes going forward than any of the past elections I've lived through. I know there have been others in American's history that have been very divisive as well, but for our lifetimes, we were all born 1990, 1991. I would argue that this is probably the most divisive election. And on top of that, we have two old white men who you can criticize each of them for various reasons, but one thing that they both have in common is that I would argue they're a little bit out of touch with what a lot of people our age specifically want from this country. Um, and it's the most American thing that I can think of to happen, where we have this collection of some of the smartest minds, some of the hardest working people in the world in our country, and we get these two old senile white men as our candidates who I would say at best can unify their parties, um, but I would not wager either of them will unify this country. That's my own personal thoughts, and we'll get into that later on. The last big issue going on in our country right now is there's generally civil unrest sparked by racial inequality at the hands of law enforcement across the country. That being said, don't think I'd say that the protests have gone beyond just being about racial injustice. I think it's just a lot of people fed up with everything right now. One of my favorite quotes I heard was actually from a local LA resident. A few months ago, they were marching, protesting outside the mayor's house, and the mayor's neighbor, the news crew, asked him what he thought about the protests, and he basically said, people are just fed up. They've been sheltered with the pandemic, not being able to go out. There's been little to no action by the government to make their lives any better or easier, and they're fed up and they've had enough. And I think that's kind of what we are seeing in the streets today. I think racial injustice is probably the spark and the trigger that's causing them. but I don't think it's. And again, this is my personal views. I would wager it's not why many people are actually out there protesting. I think they just want to yell. So, with that being said, that is the state of affairs right now on September 2nd, 2020, 2 months out of an election, with these big issues at hand. So as we kind of get into this chat, and as this is our first episode, it'll probably be more kind of just getting to know each other's backgrounds and why we feel certain ways about things. But I'd really like to hear from each of the other hosts on here, what basically just wipe the slate clean. Let's take away the people that are heading these parties. Take away Trump, take away Biden, take away all the people. Where would you see your political leanings being right now? How have you viewed yourself both historically, and how do you view yourself now? How have those changed? And how has your background kind of led you to how you feel about politics today? And with that, I'll open it up to whoever wants to go first. And then I'll certainly give my 2 cents as well. Why don't we start with you, Walter?
All right, so I guess I would call myself somewhat of a centrist these days. I think I was more left at a younger age. I remember me and Ralphie staying up watching the '08 election, drinking Coors Light in his parents' basement, totally stoked on Obama winning. That was pretty fun times. But I think as I've gotten a little bit older, I think specifically with what happened in 2016, I've been more, I want to say, exposed to some of the flaws in the left way of thinking. So I would say I was further left then. I'm more in the middle now. My big thing, the one thing that will always get me is all the anti-science stuff that I'm seeing nowadays. I think that's one issue that I'll always have to speak up about. You were talking about the virus earlier, Johnny, and I'm thinking while you're saying that, like, it's funny that we even have a political spat over a virus. Like, it's just,
Yeah.
It's something that you wouldn't have happened probably 10 years ago.
Yeah, and it's really not even about how they're handling it. It's just about the legitimacy of the virus itself, which is what's mind-boggling.
Yeah, I agree. And you'll probably find out if we do a lot of these shows. I like to argue with everyone. These guys will tell you here. Even if I agree with you, I just like to argue. It's kind of fun. So hopefully I won't be too annoying about it. But I think we're always pretty good at kind of reining it in and everybody coming together and finding some common ground. So that's the whole goal, right? But yeah, that's my deal for the most part. What about you, Ralphie?
Great.
What's your deal?
So I'd say if I were to describe my upbringing, I would say is rather privileged. Actually, probably very privileged. Grew up definitely upper middle class. Well, middle to upper middle class. I don't know how people define those things these days.
Did your dad drive a Beamer, or did he drive like a nice Honda?
My dad did not drive a Beamer, but mostly because he's cheap or frugal with his money. But he could have driven a Beamer if he wanted to.
Okay, I would classify that as upper middle.
Yeah, I think so. I grew up in a very, I'd say a pretty rich town overall. Very good education system. My college education was paid for by my parents. I didn't have to worry about student debt or any of that stuff that the vast majority of people have to worry about. And I think that kind of did influence my political views, but only in the sense that I feel like there should be more people growing up like that in America, in allegedly the richest country in the world. Yeah. I think that should be more the norm than the exception. And it is the exception. I will definitely acknowledge that. Like Walter said, I was definitely, on the Obama train back in '08. Definitely considered myself a devout Democrat. I fell for the whole hope and change platform that he ran on, which was very convincing. As I saw his, as I got older and I learned more about his presidency and the Democratic Party in general, I now consider myself an independent. I kind of see the Republican and Democratic parties as pretty much just one party. I see them both as pro-war, pro-Wall Street, anti-universal health care, pro-drug war, pretty much all the things that I'm not about. So I'm kind of in a position now where I don't think there's anybody fighting for what I actually believe in.
That's depressing to hear.
Yeah, but you know what? I think there's a lot of people like that.
Yeah.
I think the biggest group of voting age Americans is non-voters. If you look at Democrats, Republicans, and non-voters, the non-voters are the biggest percentage. And I think it's because there's a lot of people that feel the way I do, that there's no one out there really fucking fighting for the people who need it. The people who didn't grow up the way I did, the people who had a shitty education, who didn't go to college because they couldn't afford it and they didn't want to take on the debt, et cetera, et cetera. So if I were to describe myself, I would say I'm progressive, whatever that means these days. That word kind of means nothing anymore, but the Bernie platform, the AOC platform is what I most closely identify with. I have my differences with some of those views, but that's how I would describe myself.
And when would you say you kind of shifted more away from this traditional Democrat views? Was that like at a specific election time, or do you think it was more kind of gradual?
To be honest, I didn't really start giving a shit about politics until probably the 2012 election. Right. Just because it was such a wild election. Trump winning the Republican primary and
2016.
2016. Sorry, Trump winning the primary. The whole Republican primary was a fucking shit show. It was very entertaining.
I think threw us all for a loop.
Yeah, it was crazy. And Bernie, once I heard about Bernie's platform, learned more about it, I started watching more political commentary, and that's when I actually started giving a shit about the issues. Whereas before that, I was kind of just like, go Democrats, go Team Blue, like picking a side like most Americans do.
Fair enough. Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's pretty much all I gotta say from my introduction.
Yeah, I'll touch back on those. Arnold.
What's going on?
Arnold Reagan, if you guys can't tell.
Well, I definitely started getting into politics late in high school, which I wasn't really even that into politics. I think it was more of just listening to what my parents had to say. I definitely grew up in a Republican household. Grandparents on my dad's side, very religious, God this, God that. Which is fine. I think that led them to live a very peaceful life to an extent, where my grandmother passed and she was happy and content with going when she did, I believe. But yeah, my parents were definitely more Republican, and I definitely lean more right on certain things, but I would consider myself now, after life experiences with the legal system and where marijuana stands in the eye of so many Americans still to this day, I consider myself more libertarian, if anything, because I believe what you want to do in your home, you should be able to do. I don't have any woes against abortion. I think that, if you made a silly decision and you want to, eliminate that in trimester 1 or 2, okay, but pushing it for trimester 3 might be a little bit too much in my eyes. So I do think that there should be some halts on some of it, because I think that there is a fine line of crossing that threshold of it being murder. But yeah, I think on most social issues, I lean more left. But when it comes to leaning more left on things, I like to look at it still from the other perspective. I feel like a lot of people today are just kind of running with the idea of left this, left that, and I think that's fine in a lot of things. And I think the general idea of, like we said in the chat earlier, that the movement of certain things is, the heart is there, and I believe in the heart, but I don't believe in the organizations backing it. So, that's where I kind of find myself questioning to this day, like, where do I find myself in this election? It's part
Yeah.
of me is like, out of fear, to think of what could happen if, Biden is elected. I mean, there is definitely fear behind that, but there's also fear behind Trump being elected too. There's two
Mhm.
different fears. It's the lesser of two evils again, in my eyes. But I mean, this, looking back at 2016, I mean, that was the same idea, right? We were all like, "Oh, that's the lesser of two evils," but I feel like this is actually this is actually worse. This is an even more crucial election than it was in 2016. That this is something that, like, what's going to happen? I don't know. There's pros and cons of each, and that's where I just kind of, I don't know. But I think most of my mindset, just from my upbringing, from even just certain things in my life, I don't know. I find myself still, questioning it from a right side perspective, but doesn't mean I don't back the left side perspective, or not saying that, I don't follow certain things or movements. Like, I do. It's just, it's when you have somebody who established themselves as a Marxist, it's like, kind of throws reputation up there, but so does everything else. I mean, so does so many other things.
Yeah.
I mean, you look at Joe Biden for what has behind him of potentially raping a woman. You have Trump, who has allegations of rape too. I mean, it's like you have all these allegations against certain people and what they've said in the past. So it's like, what I have trouble with, and like many of you all said, is why is it narrowed down to two old dudes that have shitty fucking pasts and who've literally, like, have the worst reputations, like the worst
Mhm.
reputations of potentially raping women, sexually harassment, and those
Yeah.
guys are going to be potentially running our country. So that's kind of where I lie on things. But back to, what, you know uh the whole thing about the right side of things, I do think that, it is too much. There is this anti-science thing that is just, like, unreal. That kind of just blows my mind.
Yeah. And I
I
know
mean,
you've been really vocal about COVID, probably more so than many of my friends, about protecting yourself
yeah.
that I've heard.
I
I
mean,
know.
I've taken it. I mean, I definitely think I've gotten a little bit looser on, and kind of opening
Yeah.
my comfort zone on certain things. But I mean, I'm going to probably start traveling again in October. I'm not coming home though. I'm
Yeah.
not coming back to Jersey. I'm going to be going back to Chicago, which that even makes me kind of a little bit uncomfortable. But
So Walter and Ralphie, you've traditionally, voted blue, I'm guessing, through most of the elections. But Arnold, how have you traditionally voted in elections? Has it been more blue, red? Have you mostly voted Republican?
it's been more red. Yeah, no, for sure. Um, I think Obama, the appearance of Obama was great. He was the JFK of probably our generation, if you think about it, as of now. Um, Nobody has spoken that well, and I think how he portrayed himself and everything. I mean, just him breaking that barrier as a whole, becoming the first, you know, African American man to be president. I mean, that's a huge thing that, Martin Luther King and Malcolm X can look back on and just be like, I mean, they're looking down at this as like, holy crap, like,
Yeah. Yeah.
this is all what we've wanted. This is what we fought for. This is what we've put our lives out there for. And, that was amazing in itself. So, I mean, I don't hate Obama. I just don't think that his promises were fulfilled, as one of us had said here. Let me get my little cheat sheet up. Ralphie said, was it the blue law that protected police officers? I mean, I feel like that's not what you needed to do. I
Hmm.
mean, there was also different times, but
Yeah.
still, a lot of this kind of fell when he was also president. A
Sure.
lot of this
Yeah.
stuff was still going on.
Yeah.
So
No
There's
doubt.
still that racial inequality, civil unrest.
Income inequality.
income inequality. I think what makes it different, at least in my eyes, in how, at least with like the civil unrest, how it was handled, was it almost feels to me like Trump is kind of fanning the flames of it a bit, and it might have just been because I was in like college years for most of Obama's presidency, like in undergrad and grad school, where I was really like removed from a lot of what was going on in the country to really care
Also,
about it
different
that
time.
much.
Different time.
Different
I feel like
time.
none of us. I feel like more
Yeah.
people of college now are probably more engaged in what's going on because of how important and how things have been. I mean, just think about COVID.
Yeah.
I mean, that had everyone tuned in the news, or at least
Yeah.
like checking in on things. So, I mean, I don't know. I feel like people are more informed, or at least willing to be more informed now than ever.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I
Or at least
agree.
more engaged, for sure, more engaged.
Yeah,
For
And
sure.
I think
that's what I
Trump
meant.
has a lot to do with that, you know? Say what you want about the guy, like him or hate him, he has made people engaged in the news, events, politics. I think he actually has a lot to do with it. I'm not gonna
Yeah.
lie. I mean, that's a big
No
reason why
doubt.
I got into politics.
Yeah, and I mean, it kind of go. I said it in the intro of this question, like take the figureheads out of the parties and how would you lean. But it's true; they do impact how people around the country want to interact with politics. Really quickly about my background, I think it's not too much different from the three of you, except I was born and raised in Ohio. I'm curious to hear about your guys' hometown experience and how that maybe influenced your guys' views personally. My upbringing, I would say I got into politics as early as 2000. I can still remember my dad staying up to watch the Bush Gore election, and this might be a fake memory I have in my mind, but going to bed happy that Gore had won, and then the whole recount fiasco thing happened that had Bush W being elected. But I think that it played an impact in me really wanting to follow politics, and I would certainly say my parents influenced my views. My mom, I think, is probably more your traditional moderate Republican. Um, I know that my grandparents are on both sides are very Republican, but my dad was always very left. It felt like he really did not care for W. Bush at all. So I think 2000 really helped me get into it, and I would argue, the events of September 11th definitely played an impact on how I view U.S. policy and the world. It definitely impacts how I view what's best for the country, and I think that definitely has a big influence on how I feel about the country's direction. And then I've always been mostly blue. I've always been blue, not mostly blue. I voted Democrat every election I could. Um, I was a big Obama supporter. I voted for Bernie in 2016 in the primary. Same in this year's primary as well. But I think my views on politics are always kind of a conflict, and I've mentioned this in the chat, but it's a conflict of what I personally want and what I think is actually more a realistic solution that would happen in our country. And I am certainly guilty of being extreme on certain issues, and that's just how I am. I think one area where my views have changed and maybe gone more moderate is how I view the income of one's or the ownership of one's income. I don't necessarily hate taxes, and I think they're necessary, but I can understand the point of a person who works their life to make a certain amount of money and then getting 50% of that taxed back into the government, being upset with that. I understand that. And I think that does sway a little bit on how I feel about certain political issues. But overall, I mean, my whole upbringing was, mostly Democrat influence. I've always been pro people just being themselves, which I think is it's kind of come around. Even Republicans, they're not. I don't think a lot of Republicans are really going to try and get rid of gay marriage now. It's just the fact that it's going to be around. I think there's going to be people that might try and resist it if they're, working in a courthouse, but then they get arrested and the people get married anyway. So it doesn't really. I think there's certain social issues that have come around, and I think part of that is attributed to younger generations, specifically the work of what people of our parents' generation did. If you look at the whole '60s counterculture movement, that's who's in office right now. I mean, for the most part, especially if you look in like the Senate, like that's the population that is in the office right now, and they have a lot of influence on what is going on in our current politics.
So where's the legal weed at then? That's what I want to know.
Yeah, that is the legal weed thing. I have no clue. I mean, I'm in California, so I don't really worry about that. I don't care. But I can understand you boys being a little salty on that. So with that being said, I did kind of get to a point. So you guys all mostly grew up in the same area. And like I said, I grew up in Ohio. I grew up in one of the most Republican counties within Ohio. I mean, it's where the Speaker of the House under Obama was from that district in southwestern Ohio. And I moved to like rural Ohio, which is just as conservative as where I was born and raised in Cincinnati area, although that rural place was a little bit, your more traditional rednecky Republicans, which I look at where I grew up as like suburban, your more moderate Republicans, more fiscally concerned about Republican issues. But I know that the three of you all grew up around the same area, and I'm curious to know how that kind of impacted your views and how they differed from your peers. And I know that you, Ralphie, lived a few years in Venezuela, so curious to see how, even living in a foreign country may have impacted your views on U.S. policy.
So I did live in Venezuela. That is true. I lived there in first and second grade, so I was obviously not thinking about politics at all. Wasn't even on the radar. If there's anything from that experience that influenced my worldview and my politics, it would be just seeing a third world country, seeing what actual poverty, extreme poverty, really looks like. I remember we took a trip. We gathered like a bunch of old toys that we didn't give a shit about anymore, like just busted old toys that we took for granted, just laying around. Gathered like old clothes that we don't wear anymore, put it all in like a big trash bag, and we went out into like the poorest area where there was people walking around with like literally naked, dude, like living in shacks made out of like sheets of metal and like just makeshift shacks. Like it was extreme poverty. I remember handing out those toys and those clothes to like kids, and they were just like fucking insanely grateful for all of these things that I didn't even think about. Like they were just laying around in our house. Like,
yeah,
I think that maybe is probably one of the most influential things for me, is because I just realized like how good I fucking have it and how privileged I really am.
Yeah.
And it just made me feel like almost guilty, to be honest.
Fair.
I feel like there should be more people that have that privilege.
Yeah.
So if anything, that's what I learned from that experience.
True. And then how about your hometown guys? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, as far as where we all went to high school together in that town, so it's in New Jersey, which is obviously overall a blue state. But the county that we were within, I would consider a red county. It's one of the wealthier counties in the country, I think, statistically speaking. But the town within that red county is very diverse, more so than a lot of the towns around here. So we kind of got a weird mixture of exposures where, we had huge diverse population in our school, but also Johnny, we had those sort of fiscal conservatives, I guess you would say, around, because it's a lot of commuters who make big money in New York City and live out in the suburbs.
Yeah, that sounds a lot like where I initially was born and raised in, is kind of that suburban Republican. But yeah.
Yeah, no, that's pretty much it. I would say I noticed a difference because of how diverse our school was. When I talk to people maybe who are from Pennsylvania or even different parts of New Jersey, they have a sort of a different kind of outlook, I think, on some of those issues as far as race. So I think we're pretty lucky to have that experience in our school. I think it's a fairly large school as well, so we got a lot of different exposures, a lot of different types of people. So, but
Cool.
and I would say there's because the county is red, but I don't know, Arnold, you can tell me if this is true. I don't see any Trump flags or any Trump signs anywhere where I
think
go.
I haven't seen any either, but I think this is also a different election. I mean, I think people are also I mean, they could have changed their votes, but I think everyone's also in fear to even express that, especially now. You hear like the headlines: a Trump supporter gets killed in Portland, and people are just afraid to put that stuff out. You know, like I know for example, my grandparents, they won't put any of that on their lawn. You know, they're Trump supporters, but they're not going to put that on their lawn. They know, you know, and they're in Essex. They're in Essex County. I mean, they're in West Caldwell, but Essex County also is like right near Newark. You know, I mean, I don't know
Yeah.
if you know recently too. I mean, I don't know, around our town over the last just 2 weeks. Walter, correct me if I'm wrong. Have you seen those signs that say like lock your doors and all this stuff? I mean, now they're saying that there's like break-ins in the neighborhoods around here and stuff like that. So like, I don't know. You know, I don't know. Um,
I haven't
I'm
seen that, but if that's going on, that's an
there's
issue that we
signs
should get to talking about.
there's
Because that's insane.
there's signs
It's
over
insane.
over on 202. It says like lock your doors, lock your window, or lock your cars, even in your driveways. And over by like my girlfriend's house, their neighbor was pulling in late night with his car. He ships cars and he like refurbishes cars and sells them. And there was a cop sitting in their cul-de-sac. And the cop asked him like, "Oh, do you live here and stuff?" And he's like, "Yeah." And he's like, "Oh, just like make sure you lock everything up because there's been break-ins on the other side of town, over
Yeah.
by Walter's side."
And Parsippany, how just for people who don't know where that is, that's like northern New Jersey, right? Like not too
We're
far
like
from New York
no
City.
no traffic, no traffic. You can get into Manhattan in 35 minutes.
Okay. And then Ralphie, you're down in West Palm, the heart of Trump country.
Yeah.
You
That's
see
right.
signs down there, I'm sure.
Fuck yeah, dude. People ain't ashamed down here.
Yeah.
In Florida, they say it's a swing state, but it's a fucking red state.
Yeah, it's a red state except for like Orlando and Miami.
The only signs that I see around are Buco signs. And Walter, correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, have you seen those signs around our area?
I haven't, but I haven't been looking too much. I believe you.
Over by like Morris Plains area, I see them like lined up all over the place.
And it's interesting. I think one of the things that I'm curious about too, and actually my sister mentioned this to me because she was telling me about how she has one of her best friends, almost identical upbringing, almost identical life. You know, they have 2 kids, married, all that. Almost everything is identical, but they have such different political views. Knowing that you guys have very similar kind of upbringings too, like in the same area, and Ralphie, you described it, you're, upper middle class a little bit more than the others, but do you think there's a reason why your views are so different, given that you generally had pretty similar upbringings? I mean, we all are, I would say, healthy white males in the United States. I couldn't really think of a easier demographic to belong to. Do you have any idea why you might have such different beliefs? I mean, they aren't really that different, to be honest, but they do differ in certain areas.
Family.
Yeah, probably family, honestly.
Yeah.
I think that's the entire reason why.
Upbringing and the values that your parents said were important.
Yeah.
I don't even know it's so much values at this point. I mean, I think that like, because my parents aren't very religious.
Yeah.
I wasn't raised like, oh, I go to church every Sunday type thing. But it's definitely values. It's definitely comes from their parents.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think
You know,
religion actually does have a pretty significant impact on your political views.
Certainly.
Like, my dad's a straight up atheist. My mom's Christian. I mean, she believes in God, heaven and hell, and all that. But yeah, I think I always kind of identified more with my dad politically.
Yeah. And we'll definitely debate religion and politics.
Oh yeah, that's a whole goddamn that's a whole other issue, bro.
But you say you identify as an atheist, Ralphie?
Oh yeah, definitely, 100% atheist.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been like that for a long time. I mean, I don't know if that's why our views are different, but it's a part of it, a piece of the puzzle.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, I think
I don't know. What do you
our
think?
upbringings were definitely different. I mean, we came together in elementary school, middle school, high school, but we definitely, we all had our own upbringings, and they're all slightly
different
different.
experiences,
Yeah.
different life
Yeah.
experiences.
My
We've gone through
my
different
parents got
things.
divorced when I was like 1 year old. My dad has lived in poverty he lives in a trailer to this day. So I have a little. I'm not going to say that I'm in poverty or I have ever been, because I was fortunate enough to have a stepdad that kind of stepped in and kind of helped lift my family up. I would say they were definitely lower class when I was younger. It's not Venezuela poverty. Even the poverty that we have here in New York State or New Jersey, whatever. Yeah, it's nothing close to like what Ralphie saw when he was in Venezuela. But it's a different perspective. Having lived in both sort of worlds, where I was maybe lower class and now moved up into upper middle class. Yeah, and my father raised me as a Mormon, which is a absolutely insane church. I'll say it's way out there. We can get into that at some point too. But
yeah.
I'm
I gotta tell you
definitely
about my
more
Salt Lake
agnostic.
experience.
I was in a band
Yeah.
with a Mormon for
yeah.
like 3 months. Yeah.
Super nice
What-
people, man. They're like the nicest people you ever meet. But the whole thing is totally nuts.
Yeah.
Just real quick, when I was in Salt Lake, when you're going into like departures and you're going through security, it's like a whole different atmosphere than like the downstairs, which is all arrivals. So like the upstairs is just a bunch of families hugging their kids as they leave for missions, and they're crying. And then as you hear downstairs, people cheering people coming home from their missions. So it's just like, it's so funny. It's just like the drastic difference between it's hilarious.
It is kind of
Honestly,
heartwarming
you could just go stand there and just like you just hear people cheering like downstairs, like just yay, and then people upstairs like, I'm gonna miss you, son, and they're like hugging them, and then I'm gonna miss you, pop, and they just set them off.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, any religion that's founded on the idea of finding golden plates, I'm always going to kind of be skeptical of its legitimacy. But
Dum,
I
dum, 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 dum.
don't want to dump on it too much right now.
Yeah, no, it's fun to do. Let's save it for another time. We can really go in on the LDS church. It'll be a good time.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I mean, with that, I think I kind of want to wrap up that, section. I think we did, it's important that we kind of really explain like our views and upbringings, because as we do like future episodes and shows, people will be able to understand why we feel certain ways about things, and can have that mindset and always use it as a callback for why we feel a certain way. I would argue that in this very first episode, we did find some common ground. We generally are all for the legalization of marijuana, and we all, I think we can all attribute a lot of our beliefs and political beliefs to how we were raised in our family. And the family, whether it's values, religion, whatever it is that they instilled in us, has always attributed to what our beliefs are on a political spectrum. So, I mean, I think we already do have some solid common ground to stand upon. 10-cent pun right there. As we go into future topics and everything. You guys have anything to add about that?
I like tattoos.
Yeah, I mean, I think legal weed is definitely probably our most solid common ground. But I do believe that we will find much more as we continue.
Yeah, and it is interesting too. We all have shifted our political beliefs as we've gotten older. They're not the same as they were when we were younger. I think maybe I'm probably more traditional Democrat, but I don't know. I'm very extreme on certain things, and there's other things I don't give two shits about. So,
You know why I think our views changed? Because we went away to college.
yeah, that is
I
true.
think that's a huge reason why is we got to mesh with a bunch of different individuals.
That's a
We
really
got
good
an
point.
we got an education, and that's why some of us maybe don't completely lean all the way left anymore, or don't completely all the way right anymore, because their life experiences. Like, I'm not full right because I spent time in the legal system. You know, it's like that. The government failed me over something so small for what I did. Like, I didn't murder somebody, I didn't rape somebody, I didn't harm anyone. You know, I just decided to get a little high and spread that love with somebody of weed, which is now, for the record, it's legal, it's decriminalized in New Jersey and New York, and Pennsylvania, where I got my legal charges, is now pushing for legalization as well. So
Yeah.
that's 8 years ago. I got the book thrown at me, and you know, system failed me. So that's why I like, I think on a fiscal, that's why I lean more fiscal on certain things, because I mean, I want my money. I don't want to be taxed as shit. I do agree with you, like you said, Johnny, that you do need to be taxed, because it does need to go towards like infrastructure and things like that. But imagine you legalize some weed, that all that tax money goes towards infrastructure, and you won't have to get as taxed as much. So I mean, that's why I find myself more libertarian now, because on social issues, like I've said, like I lean more left. But there is a part of me that has like, and I wouldn't say that I'm atheist or anything like that. I definitely have more Christian beliefs. I'm not really sure what I'd classify it as, but I think my moral compass on things leans that way. So
yeah, it's fair enough. Definitely plays an impact for sure.
But I think that's why everyone, what I was getting to say is, I think everyone, because everyone went away to school, everyone they were living on their own and doing certain things. But like you, Johnny Bones, coming from, Ohio, I'm sure going to Florida, I mean, that, with especially a university of 70,000 people, I'm sure that was like, an eye opener for you, that not everyone is a racist piece of shit.
Yeah, and I don't want to shit on everyone I don't want to shit on everyone I grew up with. I mean, I have a lot of friends in high school that either are liberal, or are Republican, but aren't racist piece of shit. But then you do have a large number of people that I've seen actually kind of lean more that way with Trump as president as well. I think they've kind of exposed themselves, for lack of a better term, how they feel in that regard. But yeah, I think certainly going to Florida definitely was eye-opening. And I've lived in Colorado and California now. I've tried to get to more progressive liberal states as I've gotten older, mostly just because I like California, but also I think that I just generally fit in better with that kind of crowd out here.
But you lean more right now than ever. I'm not saying you lean all the way right, but you lean more moderate than ever when it comes to fiscal kind of things, because you've gotten a paycheck.
Yes, I definitely do. Let's put it this way. I don't think people should be taxed, but I believe that companies generally need to be taxed up the ass. And when I see things about Amazon and Walmart and places of that nature paying 0% in tax dollars,
Walmart stock up.
That's where I have issues. Anyway,
good investment. Just saying.
Let's move on to more less heated topic and talk about something more fun. So I've always been curious. What do you guys feel is more important to current society? Art, which will include, music, painting, will include film and written works, or sports? If you had to get rid of one and keep the other, what is more important to you and why?
That's so easy. I'll start. Fuck sports, dude. Sports can go. It just makes us even more tribalistic than we already are, which is the last thing this fucking country needs.
That includes skateboarding, Nick.
Does it, though?
It does. Skateboarding's a sport. That's a sport.
Is it? I guess
debatable.
let's
Yeah, it
sports
is.
and games. We're
I think
putting
it's
a
more
lot under
artistic
art. We're
than a
putting a
sport.
lot.
I
Under
don't know,
art.
man. It does play X Games.
We're
All
putting
right,
a
if
lot
you,
under art, so we
we
gotta
can
put
get
in
rid of
like
the
games and
sports aspect of skateboarding, like X Games and competitions.
But couldn't you
But
get the?
I
But
believe
couldn't you?
just going out there and street skating by yourself, like that is art in its purest form, in my opinion.
But can't catching a football like one-handed and things like that be a form of art in a way? Of like that's not something that you can just do on your own, right? That's not what you can do. You can't
yeah,
jump
it's
like
true.
4 feet in the air and grab something one hand like Odell Beckham. That's a form of art. He's one of many few people.
He's an
So I mean, we
artist
could
at
also
catching
argue.
balls for sure.
So I
Yeah,
think we should get back to just what we were saying is eliminating skateboarding too, and then considering that as a sport
All
because
right,
it is a sport.
yeah.
that's straight.
But
But
you'd
I would
still
say,
be
but
art.
I'll go off. I would say art because music falls under art, and I think
Right,
music is the
exactly.
full circle of life. If music was not in my everyday, I would have probably killed myself.
Mm-hmm.
Damn.
If they just took it away from me, if I never knew what music was, then maybe it'd be different. But if I like, they were just like
Yeah,
that was the decision. I would need music. I mean, movies is a form of art.
yeah.
I love movies, TV shows, everything. So I mean, I can
Yeah.
live without sports.
Yeah.
Sports is
I
just an
think
added.
art and music can do something to like let's say you watch Shawshank Redemption and you come away from that thinking like, that's really like got me thinking differently than I was thinking before. You know, like art can have a profound kind of impact on your life. Whereas I guess for some people, like going to like a Giants game can have that effect too. It's never landed on me personally in that way. It's just kind of like
Yeah.
a way to kill some time, you know.
But we
But I
can
do understand that people get really into it. If you play sports, that's another thing. You know, you can find meaning that way. So,
For
But
sure.
also the
Yeah.
platform of sports though could be something though that is a form of art. Like I mean, just think about LeBron James and the whole like Black Lives Matter movement, how they staged a protest. I mean, that's all based on a platform of sports, which
Yeah.
that is also important. I mean, Shawshank Redemption or a movie like Malcolm X or anything like that, even American History X. I mean, that whole movie. I mean, that's all like a form of art that's trying to teach people like that like racism is bad and all of that. I mean, that's where sport also comes in as a huge form of a way to kind of like influence people. So it's a tricky topic, I
Yeah.
think.
I
I think
I
there's a fine line
I had a
almost.
hard time with this because, I came up with a topic, but I I love music. I can't imagine my life without music. I played drums for like 20 years now. I've been learning guitar and bass guitar. I play it almost every day. Guitar, just movies, film, literature. I don't read as much. I don't know if that's really art. You could debate it, but I can't imagine my life without sports in it. And I think it's a weird thing. If I had to choose one thing, I would say, God, I can't even decide. I'd have to say sports, just because, kind of to what you were saying, Walter, that when you listen to music, you can kind of like tune out, or it helps you get in a certain mood, or helps you think about things. The way I view sports, especially if I'm playing a sport, is that really lets me just tune out and just focus on what that sport is. Versus when I'm listening to music, or if I'm looking at, I'm not really good at looking at painting and interpreting what it is. But if I'm like listening to a
no one
song,
is.
yeah, yeah, I'll just
It's
It's all
bullshit.
nonsense.
But when I'm listening to music, half the time I'm still in my own head, like thinking about just my own personal life or things that are bothering me. Whereas I think sports really does provide an ultimate distraction for somebody like me who is in their own head a lot. And whether I'm playing a sport or watching a sport, I'm usually ultimately just like focused on it. And especially like when you look at sports, the physical health aspect of it, I'd argue, one's better for your physical health, one's better for your mental health as far as performing them. If you're watching sports, you look at all the fat NFL fans there are, but I mean, if you're playing football, or you're playing basketball or skateboarding, it's good for your physical health. And I think for me, I played sports my whole life. I didn't always want to do music or play like arts my whole life. So I kind of have to lean towards sports. And also especially because we kind of had a few months without sports and I really missed it. I really miss not having sports. I probably watched more baseball games the past month than I've watched in the past 5 years, just because they're on.
Yeah.
And uh, and you know, if all of a sudden music died, I'd probably I might change my tune on that. You know, I might if they canceled all art during the pandemic, I might lean towards art. But having actually missed out on sports, it was pretty hard for me. I would say if you take music out of the art equation, though, it would be easy peasy, Japanesey, you know, sports.
One thing I think I would add, I think sports are probably more influential on like a personal level, like on an individual level.
Yeah.
Especially now you guys threw skateboarding in the mix, like, goddamn, like that was probably the only thing I've ever been passionate about. It might be the only thing I'll ever be passionate about, skateboarding. But that's all on a personal level. I think on like a societal level, like if you look big picture, I think art is probably honestly more influential.
Well, it looks like art wins that debate. I'm the only person supporting sports here, but fair enough. I'd love to hear everybody else's thoughts, anyone listening to this, so make sure you email the pods at thecommongroundspod@gmail.com. That is thecommongroundspod@gmail.com. Love to hear your thoughts on what you feel about, you know, all these topics. Tell us about your upbringing. Next week, we're going to cover some more hot topics, kind of related back to the state of affairs. Specifically, we will be discussing the civil unrest going on in our country, how we feel about the Black Lives Matter movement and the organization, as well as how we feel law enforcement has handled the whole debacle from start to finish. So stay tuned for that. We'll also be talking about what is better, Apple or Microsoft. We have some very strong opinions on here already, but we'll save those for the next episode. And with that, I would like to wrap this up, our very first episode, with a cheers to the three of you, or a blunt hit, or a hit your bowl, whatever your drug or alcohol choice is, in celebration of getting not a drug, it's a plant. Cheers to the three of you guys for being on board for doing this. Well, I'm excited to get into some more like hot, debatable, heated topics in the coming weeks. And thanks for being a part of this and helping me get this up and running. And appreciate all of you.
He couldn't even wait.
Couldn't even wait. So God, cheers to you guys.
Cheers. Cheers.
Salud.
Chindan.
Right. I really just want to send out a quick thank you to my parents for always encouraging myself and my sister growing up to have our own beliefs and views on the world and country. I'd also like to thank my friends and my girlfriend who've helped support me in putting this podcast together. And lastly, I want to thank Walter, Ralphie, and Arnold, without whom this podcast would not be possible. Thank you.